Thank you so much. So just to get a quick gauge, who's here is like a full-time Rails developer? Okay. So I'm trying to understand like why you're here. So is somebody like really like thinking they want to start learning Node? Is that another reason why you're here? Okay, we're getting somewhere. Who's already like an expert in Node? Get out of here. Like you don't even need to be here. Okay, I'm just kidding, but you can stay. So if you're not an expert, maybe web frameworks in Node, like on top of Node, maybe you'll get something out of this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey, kind of where I came from and how I started switching over, and kind of where I'm leading to now as well. This presentation is available on, it's going to be through the Full Stack Toronto site. I think it's on the mobile site already. If not, this is also on my GitHub page. It's under, what you'll see is it's called like Express Node Mongo Skeleton, right? It's going to be all within there. And you're going to see that what we're going to do is go through this and kind of look at first my journey and how I got there, and then we're actually going to be diving into some of the code. So you can really see that if you're coming from a Rails background, that moving over to a Node and Express framework is actually very, very easy to do. So a little bit about myself, right? I don't consider myself a developer, or at least not a good one. I work as a developer advocate for EMC Code. We're an open source advocacy developer relations group inside of EMC. I started my background a long time ago getting to networking and switching. I got bored with that and wanted to start learning into the VMware world. So I did VMware for about 5 to 7 years. And then that's when I kind of got a little sick of VMware. I pretty much learned as much as I wanted to learn. Didn't really want to go any higher in certification tracks. And about 2.5 years ago is when the whole word like DevOps and Chef and Puppet and all these things were kind of starting to make its way in, because I've always kind of been an infrastructure geek, right? That's always kind of been my thing. And at that time, I figured I got to start learning something. And there was a guy on our team, and he was building, I don't want to call it an Amazon, right? But it's a self-service portal for infrastructure provisioning for anybody to go and access and be able to get what they wanted. And he built it all in Rails. And I was like, well, this guy's doing the same exact thing as me. I can probably do it too. So that's how I got my journey into Rails and started getting back into the coding train, because I actually did 2 years of development work in college, but I was doing Visual Basic. And everybody kind of knows, like, oh, stay far away from that, right? So I started getting away from that. But that popping back into the Ruby on Rails train is kind of how I got back into development and coding and stuff like that. And then that lasted for probably about a year and a half, and I'll kind of dive into it more. And I wanted to start learning about Node, right? I wanted to start figuring out exactly like what's so intriguing about it and all these other different kinds of things. And that's where I started developing a few programs. I got a few on my GitHub site and also on our code team site, where I just kind of had an idea about where I wanted to go and try to get out of Rails and learn more about callbacks and multi-processes and more threads and all this other sort of stuff. Actually, I shouldn't say multi-threading, but a way to kind of trick multi-threading with Node and stuff like that, right? And then now our team is doing a lot of stuff in Docker. We actually build a lot of storage persistence stuff with Docker. And so we all kind of switched over to learning on Go. So Go is kind of the thing that our team does now, since we're mostly focused on infrastructure side. So another fun fact about me, I actually had the first Google result for Kendrick up until about 2012, because I ran a pretty successful VMware-based blog for a long, long time. Still, I get plenty of hits and ad revenue through it, right? But I don't really focus on it anymore. But in around 2012 is actually when Kendrick Lamar came on the scene, and that's when my SEO just went down. And so now if you Google Kendrick, I'm like 19 pages back, right? But little fun fact about me. I actually flew up here last night. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm a kind of a whiskey and bourbon aficionado. I'm actually, I was kind of almost like very, very hesitant about coming, because today was I don't know if anybody heard of Pappy Van Winkle before? Okay, today was like a huge release in Kentucky for Pappy Van Winkle, and I missed out on it. So I sent my parents to the liquor store for me. So I got like 2 bottles today. So I'm happy about that, right? So believe me, it's a hobby that's overtaken my life, and I'm not proud of it, but it's something that I hold near and dear to me. As you can see, I've got the same hoodie in my picture here, so I don't have a very deep wardrobe as well. Another fun fact. All right. So a little bit about my team real quick. You can learn about us at emccode.github.io. we focus on all things open source. We develop a lot of stuff, as I said, for storage persistence with Docker, as well as storage persistence with Mesos. I'll talk just a tiny bit about those projects in the next slide because they, of course, paid my way to be able to come here and be able to talk to you all. But if you own any kind of EMC-related technology, if you've never heard of EMC before, we're that massive buyout, $67 billion, like a month ago by Dell. So we might be Dell code here in a few weeks. We don't really know. But if you own any kind of EMC product, I guarantee you we have something that's been written, whether it's a backup script or libraries or something like that, that integrates with a lot of our products so you could be able to do that as well. Some of the projects that we do have working on, Rexray is our Docker volume driver. So if you're using Docker and you want to learn more about storage persistence, like, oh, how do I run a database inside of a Docker container? Well, we kind of figured that out for you, as well as moving non-persistent apps into containers. That's what we built as well. We also have a Docker volume driver CLI that we've written. The Mesos module is our storage persistence for Mesos. So if you're a Mesos shop and you're trying to be like Twitter, right, and try to build your entire infrastructure like that, we started dealing with the storage persistence on there. That's all written in C++. We also have a Docker machine extensions plugin that allows you to kind of create anything you want if you are provisioning a Docker-ready host. And if you are an OpenStack person, we also have a Fuel plugin for our Scale.io product. Those are some of the 5 projects that are currently going on right now within our team. So back to topic. Let's talk about why I loved Rails, right? Like what made me fall in love with it and really made me start getting into it. Well, the first is that it's completely open source, right? There was such an extensive stuff that's already out there. And by the way, when I started getting into Rails and I started kind of figuring out the glue about how this all works, I realized that development wasn't so hard, right? Like 99% of development's already done for you with gems and all these extensions and stuff. All I have to do is just kind of glue it together, right? So it was really an easy way to get into it. And so that's what I loved about Rails is that since it's such a mature language, it's been around for almost a decade, that there were so many gems that are available that I didn't really have to do a whole lot of customization or custom work. I can kind of just pull in and kind of make whatever happen to do what I wanted. At the same time, those gems had great documentation. I didn't have to worry about trying to figure out how does this work? Do I need to go and contact the author? Do I need to contribute back to it? A lot of that stuff was pretty much done for me. So anything that I wanted to do and a lot of the applications that I wrote were pretty much ready to go for me out of the box. And support was easy, right? So, of course, that gem documentation was there. If I didn't have that, Stack Overflow, if I could Google anything, Stack Overflow's got everything, right? I mean, we're all pretty much accustomed to using Stack Overflow. And especially in the Ruby and the Rails world, there's answers for everything. So if you're using one of the main gems, there's hundreds, if not thousands of threads for some of those main gems that are out there if you're dealing with, like Fog for anything that's cloud-based, or if you're using something, I can't even name one off my head right now, but again, there's thousands of threads that are out there. And then Railscast. So my Rails people here, you probably know Railscast, right? It's awesome. It's a free, it's semi-ish free, but most of the stuff that you want to be able to learn or get into, like user authentication, right? So this is one of the big ones, and one of the apps that I still have running production out there today, I support like 500 people on my own, was trying to figure out user authentication, right? And coming from a development world where I had no idea how to do it and try to figure out where the separations of boundaries, I didn't realize I need like 3 different gems to be able to make it do what I wanted to be able to do, right? And Railscast actually had that figured out for me, right? So being able to combine Rollify, CanCan, and Devise into a single system where I have good authentication was an easy learning step, right? So if you're getting into Rails or just now trying to leave Rails, whatever, right? Railscast is a great learning opportunity for you able to learn a lot of the stuff that's out there to kind of start implementing those different things. Another thing is that the batteries were included, right? If I wanted to start a new Rails app, it was pretty easy, right? Rails knew whatever I want to call it. The folder structure was being built out. The entire, if I wanted to, I can do scaffolding, right? And, like I said, I'm not a good developer, right? Any good developer will tell you, like, don't use scaffolding, but I don't care. Like, most of the things that I build are quick 1s and 2s, right? I just do something and I get it out the door, right? I don't care because I'm just building quick things. That's why I love scaffolding. It was so easy to be able to use, right? Because if I want to just create an object, I can put all the different kinds of types there as well. So with that, being able to create the scaffolding, I got an entire CRUD and REST architecture and structure right out of the box, right? It wasn't much effort for me to be able to do that. And we'll talk about that, how that changed if you start going over to a Rails kind of model, right? And not only with that, is it would build all the REST calls for you, right? I didn't have to make it do REST calls, right? I mean, Rails basically just doing that. I just had everything right there, right? Whether I want to do post, delete, whatever, it's all there for me. So it made it super, super simple to be able to use, especially for a beginner getting back into a development world. So why did I hate Rails, right? What kind of made me start thinking like, well, maybe I've kind of wasted my time here too much. I need to start moving on. So one thing was that if you wanted to start messing with different kinds of databases, it was kind of a little bit hard, right? So SQLite 3 out of the box was pretty easy, right? I do Rails new my app, and then by default, the structure would be using a SQLite database. Now, if I want to use something like Postgres, because if you're using something like Heroku or Cloud Foundry, that requires a Postgres piece right to it. And so actually I ran into this problem, one of the first Rails apps I wrote, and I was building it, and I had it all ready to go, and then I was like, okay, cool, I'm ready to push it to Heroku, and then like everything just didn't work, right? Because the way that you need to do within the model and be able to search for different things inside the model, it just doesn't work because you have to have different kinds of syntax for Postgres versus MySQL or SQLite or something like that, right? So sometimes in the model, if you're searching for different things, you're gonna run into those tricky situations. So if you don't set up for the first time, you gotta go back and you kind of gotta figure it out. At the same time, you've also gotta go into a few different files and make sure it's actually looking for a Postgres server and not locally for like a MySQL or SQLite 3 instance. The other thing is that there's no SQLite support out of the box, right? Now, don't start flogging me right quick for this, right? Because if I want to be able to use Cassandra, it's not as easy as just saying like -- database Cassandra. Like it is easy to do for like -- database PostgreSQL. Now, I can make Cassandra work, right? I can hack it and I can make it work by saying like I don't want to use active record, which is like basically like the thing that makes Rails kind of like the easy part of being able to do it, right? And I can actually use a gem that makes Cassandra work, but at the same time, I'm kind of hacking it to make it do something that it's not really meant to do. And when you do that, you're kind of left in this no man's land, right? And you're trying to figure out like, how do I get this to work? If I run into a problem, where's my support? Right? Where are all the people that are actually either supporting this or the people that are actually using it and running it in production or whatever, that if something happens and whatever hits the fan, like who's going to be there to help support me or be able to help me figure this out, right? So that was one of the things that is very hard to come across. Model association. This is something that maybe it's just my brain, right? When you start looking through and you think like has many, belongs to many, has and belongs to many, there's all these different things that kind of get you confused about how these different objects, they talk to each other, who owns what, right? So that was one of the things in Rails that I found it very, very complicated to kind of figure out. And the last one is kind of like object migrations. If I'm creating something like at the very begin that first that object that I created and I had all those different attributes to it, and I forget something, like I forget I needed a Boolean to it or I needed to add an extra string, well then I have to create a migration file and then I basically have to add that column into the database. And I realized that almost every object I created in all my apps, I always needed to add something else. So I had like all these different migration files, right? So it got really ugly really fast. And maybe that's just because I don't think about it ahead of time and really try to scope it out and say like this is, try to whiteboard it before I do it. I just start banging away at the keyboard. It really depends on how your development cycle, how your really mind works for a lot of that. Lastly, if you are using Bootstrap with Rails, I found a little bit of wonkiness, especially if you're provisioning the stuff like Heroku, because it has to have some of the things done locally. It might be because of the asset pipeline. For some reason, I always had a problem with forms looking good with Bootstrap. And there wasn't a whole lot of documentation. You had to go through 97 different threads on Stack Overflow to kind of see what other people did to make it look like Bootstrap's page. You're like, actually like, oh yeah, that's how it's supposed to work, but it doesn't look like this on my page. Like, what's the deal, right? So you're looking at all kinds of different ways that people are doing this, and there's really no set standard on how a lot of those forms work. And if you're into glyphicons, like having these cool little things, I always had a hellish time trying to get those to work as well. Deployments. So as I said, I've said Heroku a few times, right? So I usually use Heroku or Cloud Foundry for a lot of my Rails apps because it's a service that's freely available, or it's available to me, and I just do push, right? I don't have to have a server. I don't need any backend infrastructure. I don't have to figure out networking in Amazon. I just kind of just let it go, right? Very, very simple to use. Now, the problem is that most of the time I need to seed the database, right? I need to have something there to actually get the app up and running, because it has to look for something even when it first starts. Well, when I realized that if I'm making incremental updates to my application and I forget to change that seed file, and I do a CF push or a Heroku push, then all of a sudden that seed file goes again. Now I've got 2 instances of that in my database, right? So maybe that's just a me thing, but I always found out that I wasn't very smart when it came to that for the push updates. So you always have to like either take it out of your Git check-ins or whatever to make sure that it's not seeding itself. All right. So why did I switch over to Express, right? To Node and Express, and why did I want to start learning about these different things? Well, as I said, I'm an infrastructure geek, right? And most of the things that were being built in Ruby were kind of getting crapped on in the Ruby world, right? I mean, they were kind of looked at like it's slow. You've got things like Chef that are very easy to see for Ruby implementations, but if the entire product set is built in Ruby, it doesn't move very fast, right? There's not a whole lot of threading involved. There's not a whole lot of way that you can make things move faster in that kind of world. And a lot of people looked at Rails as saying like, you don't want to do Rails. Like you think like Twitter and Facebook are using Rails. Like, no. Like you only want that for like small little things like onesie twosies, right? Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great companies out there that are running Rails in production and doing a fantastic job with HA and making things work that they need to be able to work. But I didn't want to make it hard, right? Because that's something that maybe Rails wasn't meant to do, right? It's not a very horizontal, scalable kind of architecture, right? Because of the back-end pieces. And so that's why a lot of people were kind of just looking at it like it's a good way to kind of get a POC up and running. And in my world, back-end infrastructure devs were kind of moving away from it, right? And right now, everybody's moving towards Go. Right? So it went from Ruby to Node, and then now it's kind of moving a little bit to Go. But they do this because you can get faster concurrency, you can get more cycles out of the CPU and stuff like that. And again, scaling concerns, right? Threading operations they're not very good in Ruby, to be frank, right? To be able to make it work, you've got to create new threads, but having those threads wait for one to finish and be able to talk to another really isn't there, right? That's why a lot of us that are moving to Go are looking at channels and stuff like that, because you can actually use channels to be able to say like, wait till this process is ended, send the information over here that's running in a parallel process, and then they can meet, and then this one can keep going, right? So that was some of the things that really it's sort of kind of lacking. And why did I switch, right? So JavaScript's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? So if you're just now learning JavaScript, like it's fantastic, right? JavaScript's going to be around for decades. Nobody's going to doubt you on that, right? It's going to be around for a long, long time because it's everywhere, right? It's front end, it's back end, it's in mobile. If you're in the VMware world, it's in vCenter Orchestrator. It's everywhere, right? You can't get away from it. And in my personal world, I needed to branch out. I wanted to start learning about real-time applications, right? I wanted to start looking at things that were chat kind of applications, something where something's happening instantaneously, right? And really kind of hard to do that in a Rails world, but JavaScript and the frameworks that are available for it made it really easy to do. And not only that is I wanted to get into NoSQL, right? I mean, you can raise your hand and say, yeah, I've used Mongo. People say, I hate Mongo. I don't care. I love it, whatever, because it's really easy to use. And not only that is it's all kind of JavaScript based. It's really easy to look at, and it's really easy to replicate. It's really easy to scale. So that's kind of the why I kind of want to look at the NoSQL route. Not only that is, I mean, you look into things like Cassandra and those kind of databases, right? It's real easy to kind of get a very horizontal scale out architecture because you can just have nodes talk to each other through different AWS regions, and it's easily be able to take your application to multiple continents in just a few clicks, right? So that's kind of what I loved about the NoSQL pieces of it. And I also want to learn about this thing called callback hell. So if you're getting into Node.js, you're going to learn about this thing called callback hell. You can go to callbackhell.com and you can look at it. It's kind of when your code starts looking like a sideways pyramid. It's people that know Node will understand that, right? But you'll get there if you're not there already. So when I started doing this, I looked at all the tutorials that were out there, and I said, there's nothing here that kind of mimics of what I'm looking for, right? Rails is very much a web-centric kind of application, or sorry, framework. And when I looked at Node, and then you look at like maybe Express on top of it, there wasn't very much documentation that said like, okay, so this is how you get all your CRUD operations. This is how you build REST into it. There was 97 different articles, and it was a series of trial and error to be able to figure out like, oh, this is how it works, or no, you're doing this wrong. You need this Node package instead, yada, yada, yada. And I was banging my head against the desk for probably 2 weeks just trying to get a Rails-like instance up and running so I can add, delete, and remove objects, right? I mean, that's all I really wanted. And so what I'm presenting to you today is a culmination of countless blog posts that I looked at. And it's actually I'll show you the link a little bit later where you can actually go to the final blog post that I wrote about all this we actually won a writing competition on AirPair for this. And it's going to kind of show you exactly like everything that I'm going to kind of go through and all the code on how you actually get there. And I did this because I needed consistency, right? One of the things that you look at in all the blogs, if you Google, how to write Node and Express or how to set up Node and Express, there's going to be 50 different ways to do it, right? And that's one of the things that I like about Node is it's very unopinionated, it's very unbiased, and you'll see that batteries aren't included, right? You can pick and choose whatever you want inside of Node. And I wanted a way to consistently build things that kind of look like Rails so I can be able to have that CRUD and kind of REST feel to it. Now, one of the things is that, as I said, it's unopinionated, it's unbiased, there's no batteries included, right? And so when I looked at it, I said, where's my scaffolding, right? Well, how can I create my objects really quickly? And that's not available to me. Unless you look at something like a sales framework, where something like that is available, I opted not to, right? So if you're going into that world and you're looking at things like Meteor and all those different pieces, I opted to just kind of go with you've heard the mean stack, right? I kind of went with the men stack. I kind of chopped off that A and just didn't worry about Angular, right? So I wanted to learn about how to kind of make that web framework without Angular involved. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of mimic a Rails application, so I had CRUD and REST kind of built in, so I had that same look and feel to it. So let's go ahead and kind of just dive into a little bit of how would you build it, right? How would it look? And for a Rails-minded person, well, there we go. That was fun, right? Everybody can leave. That was it. The demo gods are saving me ahead of time before I get to it. I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in and see what happens here. How are we doing on time, by the way? Oh, plenty. Okay. Cool. All right, so we'll look at, as I said, in the beginning there's NPM, so if you're like the Ruby mind, right, you gotta say like gem install Rails, right? It's sort of the same thing, right? You use the Node package manager, you install Express, and you install Express generator because I'm a sucker for template generation, and you install it with the global flag. Great. So now we have something that's similar to the Rails new whatever. Now I say Express, make my app. And when I do that, it's going to actually use the Jade templating engine by default. If you start using Jade, it's actually very, very simple to start building the pages out. But if you're familiar with Mustache or Hogan or EJS, you can also put in those parameters to be able to build that out for you. And ta-da, there we go. Basically, we're creating our entire framework, or should I say structure, for our Express web app right here, right? So we'll talk about a little bit about what these things are doing in here as we're going. Now, it says that you need to go ahead and install the dependencies. Don't install the dependencies right away, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a few different more in there. So next is we actually had Mongo up and running, right? So we want Mongo because it's really easy to kind of get a mean / chop.a off men stack up and running by just using Mongo, and it's literally 2 lines of code, right? Or should I say 2 commands, right? So brew install MongoDB and MongoD, right? So you start the Mongo daemon, and that starts Mongo locally. If you can also use something like MongoLab that lives in the cloud, but if you want to run it locally, which I'll show you, it's super simple to get going. So next we have to create the database. Again, real simple, 1 command. So once we're actually inside of the Mongo CLI here, when we get into the Mongo shell, you use a single command which is called use, whatever you want to call it, right? Right here we're going to call it node web app db. Pretty simple. Now we've got our Mongo database created, and we can start moving on away from the back end kind of database pieces, right? Like I've always told myself, like I don't want to deviate, I don't want to go into the world of tables and structs and all that sort of stuff. So I just said Mongo is super simple. And once you start looking at how like JSON kind of like plays into it, it makes life 10 times easier. Now we have to create a connection to our database, right? This is one of the things that Rails did for us is we say like we want this kind of database, click go, and it kind of has that structure for us, and it creates the connection for us. Now, inside of Node and Express, since these things are built out for us, and we can pick and choose either what kind of database we want, what kind of front-end framework do we want for Node, you kind of choose whatever you want. But since I kind of want to stick with this stack, I want to be able to say I want to connect. And actually, we're using a package called Mongoose, right? So I'm going to create a new variable called Mongoose. I'm going to specify the package that I'm using. And I'm using Mongoose, and then I'm using a method called connect. And I'm connecting to a local instance, right? And that local instance is my Node web app DB instance. Now I'm creating that inside of a folder called db.js, and I'm actually creating a file called db.js, but I'm creating this inside of a new folder called model. Now if we go back to here, we can see that there's no folder called model which is created. All right, so we kind of have to create the MVC architecture the way that we want it to look, right? So the views, as you can tell, is going to be your V. The routes is really your C, right? So we're creating our M here. And so when we're going to open up the app.js file, which is the application, really the file, kind of like the guts or the glue of this. And we need to add in or require our database inside of there, right? So when you use the npm start to actually start your Node web server, it actually looks at app.js, right? App.js is that file that it looks at to be able to say, this is what I'm running. And app.js is pretty much our glue that's going to be talking to every other file inside our application. We need some more dependencies, right? So I already said Mongo, so we need to install Mongoose. Body parser and method override. These are two other Node packages that I found that you need to be able to have successful REST-based calls. So if you need, it's not Bosey parser, it's body parser. So apologize on that typo. If somebody wants to go into the repository and send me a pull request for that, you can fix that. So you can actually use that to examine the post calls that are actually coming from the body. And then you have to use method override. We'll see that a little bit in here in a little bit more in depth about how you use method override to kind of inspect things before they get to it. So that's actually used by delete and put. So we use the -- save. And when we do this, it actually adds these packages to the package.json file. Now, think of that as your gem file if you're coming from a Rails background. These are all the packages that are necessary to actually make your application do whatever it is that you want it to do. So we've got these ready to go. Now we run npm install, and it's going to install the rest of the packages that we actually have inside the package.json file that was automatically created for us when we actually created the Express, whatever we wanted to call it. All right, so then we do npm start. Hooray, we have connection to port 3000, and we know that we have a successful connection to our Mongo database, right? Super simple. At this point, we've got something set up. We've got a web server connecting to a database, but we can't do anything with it. So let's go ahead and do something with it, right? We need to start building out our schemas, right? And I said before that this is why I loved Rails, because it did 99% of this with scaffolding, right? I didn't have to worry about anything. But now we have to create our MVC architecture, and I'm going to use blobs as my example here. So kind of use that as whatever you want. And I'm going to create a new object inside of the model folder called blobs.js. This can be whatever kind of object you want to call it. And each blob is going to have a few certain different attributes, right? I'm going to give it a name, a badge number, a date of birth, and I'm going to give it a Boolean to say, is it loved or not? So this is what a schema looks like for it, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to include our Mongoose piece, and we're going to create a new schema from the Mongoose method schema, and that's what we're going to do it, right? Very simple, very easy to read in this JSON layout to be able to kind of see how they all kind of match up, right? And from here, at the very end, we're going to call the Mongoose method model, and we're going to call it a blob, right? This is what a blob looks like, and this is our blob schema. Very, very easy to kind of see. Any questions about that? It's the hardest part of this all. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So next we have to go back into our app.js, right? That's the main file, that's the glue, and we need to add that into it, right? So now we are going to include our blobs inside of our application. Now we have to create the controller. Now, one of the things that I read in article after article after article, they're going into the index.js file, and that's where they're doing all their magic. Bad move, right? This is just going to be nothing but bad news bears later on if you continue on down this line, right? So what I suggest you need to do is leave the index.js file alone. You can use that for anything else that if you're going to be building like a front web page, like a home or a splash screen for your application, that's where this goes, right? If you're doing it, should I say, if you're doing a very, very simple web app where you have like one object, right? One model, whatever it's going to be, then you can use index.js, but I would encourage you not to, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a new route or a new folder inside, or new file inside our routes folder called blobs.js, right? And so with blobs.js, we're going to add in all these packages that we need, and then we're going to kind of look about how we start building everything in here. And this is kind of where the meat of all this really happens, right? So the first thing we have to use is our body parser, right? Sorry, should I say method override? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be looking into the body of this, right? And don't ask me why. I have no idea why, but this is always the first bit of code that has to go into your controller. I have no idea why it works. It's the middleware. Thank you. Yeah, it's the middleware, but
the follow through, that's what you request.
Right. So thanks for the explanation. Told you I was not a good developer, but glad we have going in here, right? But as I said, as you said, it's going through, but it always has to be in the beginning because it has to inspect whatever's coming from it, right? So within here, we're going to create our first piece, right? And we're going to get all of the blobs actually from the database, right? So we're going to call the model method from Mongoose, and we're going to say find. And inside those brackets, we're going to say we're going to find all of them. Now within here, we're going to be doing a little bit of callback stuff, right? So if we get an error, we're going to return something to the console as just the error, like we don't want to break everything, right? But if we don't get an error, let's go ahead and respond, and we can do it in a few different ways. This is what I loved about Node, and should I say mostly about Express, is that I have the option to kind of send back whatever I want, right? If I want to send back HTML, I can render a new page, right? I want to render the index page, and I'm going to send a few different things, and we'll kind of talk about these when we actually look into it. But I'm going to send back a title to the view, and so whenever I want to call title, I'm automatically going to get the string all my blobs, right? And when I want to call blobs, I'm actually going to get an object of all the blobs available to me. Now, if I'm doing something and I want to return JSON, pretty easy. I'm just going to respond with JSON. I'm going to say, here are all the blobs. There's a multitude of different ways of which you can respond, whether it's text or anything like that. You can respond in multiple different things if your request is looking for a particular type of response. So post. So we want to create something new, right? We want to create a new blob. Well, what we're going to do is we are going to create a few new variables, right? And we're going to be looking into the request body. And inside there, we're going to pull the pieces out of it, right? So we're going to pull the name, the badge, date of birth, and the Boolean of is it loved. And then we're going to create a new object, or should I say a new piece inside of the model for blob. And as you can see with inside there, we're just basically just line them up, right? Very, very simple to see. We're taking something that's from the schema and putting it to the variable that we're pulling out from the body. From here, we're calling a new function inside of this post request, or inside of the Mongoose model inside this function, and we're going to respond back in a few different ways, right? So we want to send them back to the /blobs, right? We want to redirect them back there. And at the same time, if we want to respond in JSON, we're just going to respond back and give them the information, basically what they put in, right? So that's what we're sending back to them. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to read about what's happening inside of here. Now, that's for a post request. What about doing it for inside of the view, right? So you've got this form and you've got something that you want to be able to do it through. Well, we need to wire that up, right? We need to make sure that the new .jade file that had been previously created for us is actually going to be tying back into the post request that is actually inside of here, right? Or should I say it's going to be the new request inside of here. So with inside of here, we're going to say that we're doing our router. We're choosing when I get to the /new page, I'm going to render the new template or the new Jade template here. And I'm going to spend back the title, add a new blob, and that's going to be the title of the page whenever I want to call it. And now we have some more middleware to validate the ID, right? Now this middleware is going to do for something if we're requesting something and it's not available, right? It's actually getting back that 404 sort of status. And what we're doing is we're actually going to be looking inside. If somebody's going through, think about it in a Rails sort of terminology, right? If you're going to the object /1 or /2 or /100, and that doesn't exist, you're going to be getting back a 404, or object not found, or whatever you've kind of set that as. You kind of have to build the same exact thing here, right? So we're going to be looking inside of our Mongoose database and seeing if that ID exists, right? If it doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and return a 404 status of not found. Yeah, so that's what the middleware is doing right there. If it doesn't find that, we can see down here in the else piece is that we're going to hit next, right? So with inside, is that breakdown for the, ooh, we got wires going everywhere, is that when it starts going down, that next callback is basically saying let's just keep going, right? So now we want to get, right? We want to get that particular ID. And if, like I said, that's the middleware, so it's going to find that before we actually get to it. So if it's not going to find it, you're going to get that 404, right? Since it's going down that JavaScript file, if it goes ahead and it goes to next, we should never have an error at this point, right? It should never start erroring out at this point. It should always just automatically be able to go and find it by ID and go to the else part of this section here. And we're doing a little bit something different here. As you can see, I've changed the way that I'm returning the blob date of birth, right? So this is one of the things that's very unique, and what I liked about all this is that I can own how the data looks and I can manipulate it from the controller before I send it back to the view. So if I didn't do that, right, and I just called blob.dob, I'm going to get some random set of string or random set of numbers because it doesn't look the way I want, right? It's not formatted the way I want, and we all know that bad practices happen when you actually put the code inside of the view, right? That's always something that you don't want to do. You want to own it inside the controller. And so from here, I can be able to say that I want the blob date of birth, and I'm calling a different package here or a different function to be able to say, like, I want to make it a different kind of string, and I'm going to basically start putting in slashes and making it look the way I want it to look. And now when I render this, I'm going to send back two things, right? I'm going to the show, right? Kind of picture that in the Rails thing that you're looking at a particular ID. You're looking at the show for that particular ID. And I'm sending back two things. I'm sending back the blob as a specific object, and I'm also sending back this variables. So when I need to show the date of birth, I have two options now, right? I can show the blob.dob, or I can just call blob.dob, right? Not an attribute of the actual blob object itself. Of course, but if I'm looking inside of JSON, I'm just going to be getting just the blob as itself, and I can't really manipulate or kind of send back what I wanted to at that point. Now, edit. I always have to be able to edit these IDs inside of here as well. So I hope the text is large enough for you all to kind of read. But first is we need to wire this to the edit.jade file. Once it's wired into there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to find the ID and we're going to get that piece, right? So we're going to look again inside of our Mongoose model here, find it by ID, and we're going to be doing the same exact thing, right? We're going to be basically changing the date of birth. We're going to be rendering it and sending it back as HTML or as JSON for this particular instance. Now, when we actually go to the edit file and we change something and we click the submit button, right, we have to be able to understand that for post. And this is where it comes in, right? It's for the put, or should I say not post, but for put. So when I click that submit button, now this is where it comes in, right? Now I'm actually looking at the put piece for this particular ID. I'm looking at what's being sent, right? I'm using body parser to start looking through, and I'm looking for the things that are being sent. And I'm just updating the record, right? So I'm finding by the ID, and I'm just calling blob.update. Very simple to kind of see. Nothing's really changed in the way here. The only thing I'm doing now is I'm redirecting back to the show page for that particular blob ID. Right? We also need to be able to delete it. We have to be able to kill these things off if we don't want them there. Pretty simple. We're going to find it, again, by ID, but this time we're going to call blob.remove. So we're going to call the remove function from here, or remove method from here to be able to delete it. And then we're going to redirect us back to the index page. It's the same kind of concept, the same sort of mentality, the same processes that you would see in sort of a Rails sort of framework as well. Now, at this point, we do one last line. We say module.exports equal router, and that's it. We've done all the CRUD, and we've done all the rest. Everything's baked in just as you would expect, right? Now, the last thing we have to do is, actually, I'll go ahead and just pull up a quick demo here. Actually, no, we're not all the way there yet. So add the views, right? So we need to actually go through and create the views. I'm just showing it for one of them here because it gets very monotonous, as you kind of saw from my last 7 slides. I'm kind of talking about the same thing over and over again. But if you start looking through all the different Jade files, it's pretty easy to start looking about how you actually use Jade, right? You're not using open and close tags. You're not trying to figure out if everything's lined up. The only thing that's going to kill you is that this is very much like YAML. So if you're using, 2 spaces or tabs, like you're going to go into like tab hell, right? Like trying to figure out like why is this not all lining up? But very, very easy to see. And now when we actually look through here, right, we're running through a for loop, right? And so with each blob in blobs, right? So remember that within inside of the index.jade file, I'm sending back that blobs instance, right? I said I want to call it blobs, and I'm going to send back the object that was found within our Mongoose database, which is all blobs. Now I'm running through all of these, right? And so using the equal sign, I can pull any piece that I want out of there, and I can show it on the screen. The form, since it's a delete, it's a request that has to happen like that. You actually have to use a form button to actually make it delete. It's one of the things that I found out that you kind of have to do. But to get to the edit and the show pieces, pretty easy to see, right? We're just calling the blob ID, and we've already wired that up to the controller of what it's going to be looking for, right? So when we go to the show page for that particular blob ID, it's going to be running that through the controller and bringing it up for us. All right, so right here we did it, right? I'll kind of quickly just run through what this is going to look like inside the folder structure here. So we have our app.js, right? That's our glue. That's our main file that's looked at when we do npm start. And it's also looking at in the package.json file. It's like the gem file, right? It's all the packages that are made to be able to make this happen. We created our model, right? Our model folders we had to create on our own. This is where the objects live of what we actually want to create. Our database, of course, and then we also have our blobs. Not going to go into the node modules because the node modules, whenever you do that npm install, and you don't do the -g flag, what it does is it installs it for that particular workspace or that particular application, wherever you're writing, right? So kind of consider that too, is that if you need something like a gem that you're going to be using, or sorry, a node package that you're going to be using as a command line tool or something like that, you're going to be using the -g flag to install that globally, versus here where a lot of it's just going to be installed locally into that particular application. You have the public piece, pretty common, which we would usually see. And then our routes, again, that's our controller. And then our views, right? Error index layout is what you're going to have for the main pieces, right? If you were going to be building a front page for it. One thing I did forget to say is within inside of the app.js file, I might have skipped over that. OK, yeah, cool. So yeah, it was right here. One of the things that we would do differently is that right here, app.use, right? So app.use is going to be our main piece. And if I didn't have this right here, this /blobs, we wouldn't have access to any of the blobs or anything like that. We wouldn't be calling anything, right? Now when we use app.use/blobs, now we go to our port 3000 /blobs, and now I have access to everything. Now, as I said before, well, what if we just have a single object here, and we want we just really care about that? Well, what I could do is I could remove this line, and instead of routes, I just put blobs right there. So when I access port 3000, the main piece, I'm just going to be getting all the blobs, right? So you kind of own how this is going to look, or what's the default route of how your application's accessed. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and just bring up a quick demo of it real quick. Everybody should be able to see that. I went crazy making it big. Okay, so Mongo's up and running. Pretty simple. npm start. All right, so now we've got our node server up and running. And we will go to port 3000. As you can see, welcome to Express, right? So this is the first thing that I had up and running. So you can see that. Now if I go to /blobs, not that, but /blobs, we look at all my blobs, right? This is what it was getting. Let's create a new one. Go to /new. I'm just going to take something in here. I'm going to put a badge number. Doesn't really matter. 1985. And I'm going to say it's loved. I'm going to click submit. Takes me back to my main page, right? Very, very much like you would think of how a Rails application is going to work. The same thing, I can delete it. I can edit it. I can change this to something even higher. I can update it. And that's my showpiece, right? So it works just like you would think in a Rails application, right? Very, very simple to be able to see. Not only that, it's pretty responsive, right? A lot faster than Rails is usually the time, even running locally here. Found out that Rails is kind of a really bloated framework, and that's why a lot of people are also kind of moving away from it, because there's a lot of things that are happening underneath the hood. But as you can see, this was minimal code. This was very, very minimal code to have pretty much CRUD and REST built in out of the box for everything you wanted to be able to do, right? So as I said, very easy to kind of see how that all works. Not going to show you REST pieces because I think we're going to run low on time. As you can see right here, we're actually looking and tailing it of everything we're doing. We can say we're doing git, delete, we're doing the post. We can see all that stuff happening inside of the logs there as well, right? So if you want to learn more about this, there's actually, like I said, if you Google that right there, how to create a Mongo or Men skeleton, whatever, it'll be one of the first Google results that comes up. This was a post that I wrote for Airpair during a writing competition that I actually won from MongoDB. So they sent me like $1,000. So woohoo, right? So pretty cool. Yeah, way more bourbon, right? So that's the link with all the code and how this is done. It's basically a very extrapolated blog post. I did that because, and it's got great reviews because, as I said before, there's so many blog posts out there where everybody says like, oh, use the index.js file or do it this way or whatever, but there's a lot of conflicting views. And I found out when I did this, it's very, very simple to do it over and over and over again. And to make it even easier, I've got it all inside of a GitHub repo. So all the code that we just ran through right there is inside the GitHub repo. So all you actually have to do is fork it, and then you're off and running, right? You can make it and do it whatever you want. And you can just go ahead and change out blobs for monkeys or beanie babies or whatever you want to call it, right? So very, very easy to get going. If you want to learn more about some of the other frameworks that are out there, right? We talked about Express. Express is one of the main ones, right? It's one of the things that has the most support, most GitHub stars, most traction, and for a lot of web frameworks that are using Node, Express is just kind of like the go-to, right? Even some of the things that are looking at other frameworks, right? Even sales and stuff like that, they're using Express. So it's one of the main ones that are out there just because of the support. But if you want to be a rebel, right? You want to be the guy that has like the super long beard and says like, I don't go like the typical route, right? You kind of want to be kind of going on your own. There's also Koa and Happy. Happy actually comes from Walmart Labs. It's what Walmart runs in production. So that's it's something that has a very good backing into it as well. That's it. Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your attendance.